See, one night I was sitting in my living room and I was looking around. I saw a painting. The thought came to me, oh, the painting had an artist. And I looked down on the table. A biology textbook that I had been reading from was sitting there. And the thought came to me, the book had an author. And the table that the book is sitting on had a carpenter. And I opened the textbook and I opened to this cell. And it struck me. Cells are more complex than paintings and books and tables. There must have been a constructor, a designer, an engineer. And it was the first time since I had been a teenager that I entertained the idea that there just might be a God. And that began a chain of events which caused me to change my perspective, my worldview. You see, cells are complex, very complex, more complex than an entire city, like the city of Los Angeles, made up of all of the communication networks and transportation networks and the power plants that generate energy. Very complex. But evolution says that it can be explained by a process of chance. If we look at the nuclear area of the cell, which contains the blueprints of life, or a molecule called DNA, we find that all of the information that was necessary to code the information which makes you and I, makes our bodies, was contained within this particular molecule that makes up the chromosomes, or the blueprints of life. How could this have happened by a process of chance? Extremely complex. One biologist has said this, trying to describe the complexity of a cell. Even if we knew all there is to know how a cell works, we would still be baffled. How nerve cells create emotions, thoughts, behavior, memory, and other perceptions cannot yet, if indeed ever, be described in the language of molecular biology. And that's a very honest statement. If scientists are honest and they look at the complexity of living organisms, they have to say, it's amazing. It cannot be explained by a process of mistakes over time. There is a phase of biological engineering which actually attempts to mimic the complexity in the design that we see in living organisms. Looking at the living things, engineers copy or design from their complex systems and produce inventions. And let me show you some of these comparisons, called bionic comparisons. For example, as a bat flies through the atmosphere, it emits frequencies from its vocal cords, which go out in front of the bat, and then these frequencies are bounced back to the bat's brain so that the brain can determine what the objects are in front of it, whether or not to intercept the object or fly around the object. An amazing system which we are told is the product of evolution. And yet when we look at a radio telescope or a radar system, no one would say that that happened by evolution. It was a product of intelligent design. Or tonight, as you are observing these visuals, your eye is picking up frequencies of the electromagnetic spectrum. They're being converted in the back of your eye electrochemically and then transmitted via the optic nerve to your brain, and these images are recorded there for as long as you live. Well, that happened by evolution, we're told, by mistakes that accumulated over long periods of time. Yet no one would ever suggest that a video system just happened by process of evolution and long periods of time. The human brain, the most complex computer that has ever been studied, made up of literally billions of cells, some of them interconnected as much as 60,000 times with other cells. The brain monitors and controls all of your bodily functions while you are asleep, while you are awake. Everything which you have sensed through your perceptions, through your senses, is recorded in your brain for as long as you live. But that evolved, we're told. Yet no one would look at a man-designed computer system and say that that happened by a process of chance. So where is the logic? If living things are more complex than the things that man designs from them, could it not be possible that living things were also designed? According to Darwin's theory, they attempt to explain this complexity and design of life from simple to complex by saying not only was there time, but mutations occurred and natural selections. And certainly there is no question that mutations do not occur. They do occur. But the majority of mutations are degenerative or harmful. For example, the Drosophila has been bombarded with everything imaginable, and all kinds of mutations have been produced. bent wings, no wings, all kinds of body deformities, but no one has ever observed anything other than a Drosophila resulting from a mutation. Mutations are mistakes in the genetic code, but they do not improve the quality of life. According to the evolutionary worldview, mutations coupled together with natural selection bring this new quality or new order of life. And again, natural selection does occur. The environment does select out the best suited of life to perpetuate life. And let me show you an example how natural selection might work. Let's say, for example, you had two different varieties of the dog kind, a St. Bernard and a Chihuahua, and you took them to the Arctic Circle in the wintertime when the temperature was minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And you left the dogs there, took them out for a walk, and they got lost in a blizzard. What do you think might happen? Well, likely the Chihuahua wouldn't survive, and the St. Bernard, being better equipped for the extremely cold conditions, could survive. So the environment, the temperature in this case, selected the best suited of what already existed. That's how natural selection works. And that does agree with the biblical creationist perspective, because through time there have been extinctions of life that occurred. Many more life forms in the past than exist today. So today, many people are questioning some of these concepts of Darwinian evolution because we have not found the evidence which supports mutations and natural selection producing new forms of life. Well, what evidence is there to support that simple can become complex, that evolution is true? As I mentioned, in the past there were more varieties than there are today. Let me give you an illustration. The chambered nautilus. Today there are only a few varieties, 6, and their size is approximately 8 to 10 inches in diameter. In the past, the chambered nautilus varieties extended to more than 3,500, and their size 8 to 12 feet in diameter. So there has been a degeneration. Or in many cases, we see that when we look at fossils and we see their counterparts today, there isn't any change at all. For example, here is a bat that is alleged to be 50 million years old, but it is identical to the bat today, no change. Or here are some insects preserved in amber. Mosquito that's claimed to be 40 million years old, it's like the mosquito today. An ant that's supposed to be 50 million years old, it's like the ant today. A praying mantis that's supposed to be millions and millions of years old, it's like the praying mantis today. There's no change. The fossil record shows that either life has degenerated or there hasn't been any change. And when we look at the complexity of life, we can't explain how complex organ systems can come into being by a process of mistakes over time. And again, once again, common sense and logic tells us that there has to be some alternative explanation. For example, when we look at the human body, we could look at any organism and see that it's made up of a number of organs. How do you explain the evolutionary development, for example, of a circulatory system, which contains a heart and blood vessels that take blood away from the heart, and then capillaries that take the blood to the cells, and then a venous system that takes the blood back to the heart? How do you explain that happening by a process of mistakes over millions of years of time? The circulatory system must be in existence, and it must be functional, or there isn't an organism. The same is true of the pulmonary system, which oxygenates the blood, or the kidney system, or any other organ system. So many people today claim that we can explain the development of life, that there are transitional forms, and that we can look at the fossil record and we can see the development, the progression over time. At least this is what has been taught as one of the foundational principles of evolution. And if evolution is true, there should be many, many links. No shortage whatsoever. There should be hundreds of thousands, millions of these so-called links between one species and another. And so we have seen all kinds of representations which try to show us how these forms develop, one species to another. Not only should we find them in the fossil record, but why shouldn't we find them around us today? Living forms, intermediates between one species and another. So let's look at some of the proposed links. Well, here's an example. It's a painting of a fish crawling out of the water onto the land and sprouting legs. But have they ever found anything like this? No, but you can go to museums and you can see all kinds of these alleged links and paintings and models. Here's an interesting one. It's a cells are more complex than paintings and books and tables. There must have been a constructor, a designer, an engineer. And it was the first time since I had been a teenager that I entertained the idea that there just might be a God. And that began a chain of events which caused me to change my perspective, my worldview. You see, cells are complex. And the thought came to me, the book had an author. And the table that the book is sitting on had a carpenter. And I opened the textbook and I opened to this cell. And it struck me. Sex. Very complex, more complex than an entire city, like the city of Los Angeles, made up of all of the communication networks and transportation networks and the power plants that generate energy. You see, one night I was sitting in my living room and I was looking around. I saw a painting. And thought came to me, oh, the painting had an artist. And I looked down on the table. A biology textbook that I had been reading from was sitting there.